Well, good morning, guys. Yes! You guys, it's happened. Summer is here, which means the 10 o'clock service is now the smaller of the two services. I'm glad that you guys are here, not at your cabins, opening them up and de-winterizing them. That's good. That's good. I'm so excited about wrapping up this series, This Changes Everything, with you guys today. It's been a ton of fun, but really I'm excited about wrapping it up because next week, and it's really kind of one of the most monumental services in our church's history. We're wrapping up, God having us in this building, and we're moving to our new location the following week. So we're going to open up the time capsule next week, which is cool. You guys are going to gain a chance to write letters to future generations, which we will put behind our future cornerstone. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a really, really cool time to celebrate God's hand on our church and look forward to the future. But in this series, I know a lot of you guys have probably heard, Jesus is a big deal. He changes everything in our lives, but how does he really do that? I grew up hearing about what a big deal Jesus was, but I was like, really? Why? I don't understand. He's a big deal, but what does that actually mean for me? And this series has been answering the question, how does Jesus actually change everything? And the first week at Easter, we said, if the resurrection is real, it changes everything. And we looked at historical and archaeological evidence for the resurrection of Christ. And then two weeks ago, I challenged you guys to look at the way that Jesus changes how we see things. And I challenge you to take a blue Post-it note and put it somewhere in your life and have a godly belief that's spoken over an ungodly one. And so I have that on my dashboard right now, and every day I remind myself that I have what it takes to do what God's called me to do. And so I love that. Big encouragement. I hope you guys are doing that. We still have 15 days left in that challenge to do the full 30-day challenge. And then last week, Pastor Isaiah absolutely nailed it, talking about how Jesus changes everything about the way we serve. And he challenged us to live out, save people, serve people. And we had 110 of you sign up to volunteer in different places. We have about 60% of our weekend attendance volunteering in our church. If you are not serving, I want you to know it's the best way to get plugged in, to meet people, to be a part of what God is doing here. You get to be a part of changing people's lives. And if you still want to do that, you can grab a next step card from the pew back in front of you, fill it out, say, I want to serve. We'll call you this week and we'll plug you in. We'll consult with you and help you find the perfect place for you and put it in the next step box that's in our lobby. We'll connect with you that way. But this week, I'll show you my point for this week. It's only one point. It's fill in the blank changes everything. And I'm not going to tell you what's in that blank till the very end of the talk. And it's only a one-point sermon. And you got to stay with me the whole time, right? We've been through this. It's going to make a ton of sense when we get to the end. Okay? And you're going to be like, wow, that's amazing. But if I told you the one point right now, you'd be like, well, that's not that cool. But at the end, it will be cool. Stay with me because it's going to be cool. Now, I just want to start by asking you a simple question. Have you ever prayed a simple prayer in your life, just kind of over and over again through the years? My prayer life is not a strong point in my life, but I have prayed since I became a Christian when I was 15, kind of the same prayer over and over and over again. And that prayer is, God, would you teach me through other people's mistakes so I can be wise without scars? That's kind of been my prayer. And I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but that's like my big prayer is, God, would you teach me through other people's mistakes so I can get their lessons free? Because when I became a Christian, I had somebody say to me, and maybe you guys have heard this, hindsight is 20/20. Have you guys ever heard that? You can always see clearly looking backwards, looking at your mistakes. Hindsight's 20/20. And I just thought, man, I'm 15, and I know a lot of people are like 18, 19, 20 years old, and their hindsight's in my future. So if they can see their past clearly, then maybe I can see my future a little bit more clearly, right? And so I just started asking people, and if you've ever hung out with me, I may have asked you this question, what's one mistake that you've made that you can give me the lesson for? I love asking that question. I love learning from other people that way, right? Because it's like, man, free lesson without consequence. Love it. I do it all the time. And I've kind of become obsessed with reading about great world leaders and reading about what their biggest mistakes were and how they recovered from them. I think it's super, super interesting because I plan on dominating the world someday. No, just kidding. I love studying, though, the greatest leaders in the world and learning from them, And, World War II leaders, Civil War leaders. It's really fascinating to read about them. And my favorite place to read about great world leaders is the Bible. I love looking at biblical world leaders and looking at the mistakes they made and how they overcame them. There's a lot of great lessons in that. And the reason why I love the Bible, just remember, there's no other book in antiquity that has been preserved as well, that has more archaeological evidence for, that corresponds with our geography and the world around us today more than the Bible. We talked about this, but I love that part about the Word of God. And the other part I love about the Bible is I used to think that it was like a perfect people book. Like the Bible was a book for perfect people. And when I read the Bible, I'm always reminded of the fact that the Bible is a place where imperfect people are following a perfect God. And because of that, that's why maybe you've heard me say at this church, we are a place where no one's perfect and everybody's welcome. Because even in the Bible, it's a bunch of messed up people who God is redeeming for our good in His glory, right? And so no matter what happened yesterday, no matter what you did this morning, I want you to know that you're welcome here, just like everybody else. And we're here to learn about Jesus this morning. Now, one of the unique parts about people, world leaders, is I have found that almost all of their mistakes are rooted in the same character defect, okay? It's fascinating when you read about great world leaders, when you read about the greatest world leaders we've ever had, all of their mistakes, even biblical leaders, boil down to the same character defect. It's fascinating to me as I look at this. And I'll tell you what the character defect is, okay? It's pride. And when I read about this, I'm always like, man, I can't believe the level of correlation, all these leaders failing because of pride. And it's interesting to me because there are a few great leaders in history that are just remembered, there's not a whole lot of mistakes. They've just done really, really well. And for them, it's because they have embodied the opposite of pride in their life. And the opposite of pride is not humility, okay? I'll talk more about that later. But because they've embodied this simple thing that's the opposite of pride. And today, I'm going to teach you from the mistakes of failed leaders and from the successes of great leaders, how to change the world, okay? And really, I would consider today's message the capstone, the cornerstone to how Jesus changes everything. And this is really about how we as Christians have the opportunity to change everything, okay? And if you're a non-Christian in the room, I promise you today's talk is going to give you more insight into why Christians irritate you than any other talk that's been given. You will like be like, oh, that's it, I got it. So for all of us, there's going to be something in this. But Christians, today I want to teach you how to change the world. I want to teach you to be the most effective people that we can possibly be in our lives. And now here's the thing about pride, is it's kind of a confusing word in today's language. Okay, and it's not surprising to me that the devil would take some of the most destructive forces in all of humanity and make a confusing word for it. But pride in English, most languages it actually would be two separate words, but pride in English covers two completely different definitions, okay? One side of pride, I call it the good side of pride. It's not bad. It's good. It's good, okay? It's good to be prideful about some things. Like I have pride in my wife. Right? She's beautiful, she's smart, she's arm candy, and there were a ton of other guys that wanted her, and I won her, right? I mean, that makes me feel good, and I'm proud of that, right? I'm proud of our church. I'm proud of my daughters. Like, I'm proud of my son kind of too, but he's not doing much yet. But I'm proud of lots of different things in life, and there's nothing wrong with that, okay? I remember growing up, I had Christians tell me, like, pride cometh before a fall, John, and they were misquoting that. Because there's a good side of pride, you know, pride in country, faith, Jesus, whatever. It's not bad. It's good. But then there's a whole bad side of pride that is a completely different, it's referring to a totally different thing that is bad. It's all bad, okay? And the bad side of pride specifically refers to considering ourselves, that is our needs, wants, skills, and value before and ahead of the needs of others, okay? That's what pride ultimately boils down to. And the Greeks called this hubris. Maybe you've heard of that word, but the Greeks had a separate word for this kind of pride that was called hubris, okay? And it's considering your needs, your wants, my skills, my opportunity, my ability, my importance in life ahead of and before the needs of others. And the bad side of pride starts, I call it the ride of pride, but the ride of pride starts a twofold process in your life. There's two things that will happen when you begin the ride of pride in your life. The first thing is that you will remove yourselves from the authority that God has placed over us. And I've totally done this in my life. But when you start the ride of pride, you remove yourself from the authority that God has placed over you. And all of us have authorities in our life, right? I mean, whether it be the government, our parents, sometimes in messed up situations, our kids. There's lots of authorities that God has placed over us, right? And when you begin the ride of pride, what you do is you remove yourself from your God-given authority. And then the next thing, this is the more destructive thing, this is the final stop on the ride of pride, is that we become unteachable. okay? We become unteachable, and this is really, really destructive, okay? Being unteachable is the worst. If I had the opportunity to hire somebody who was inexperienced and uneducated, but they were teachable, great. If I had the opportunity to hire somebody who was experienced, educated, charismatic, and full of skill, but they were unteachable, never in a million years. That's the truth. And we all know this. We all know this. If you're an owner, if you've hired somebody, if you've worked with people, you understand what I'm talking about here. But today, I want to talk about how the ride of pride changed one person's life, one great leader's life, and his name is Saul. Now, Saul was the first king of the nation of Israel, and as George Washington is to America, so Saul was to the nation of Israel, right? And now, the Israelite government was a little bit different than a normal kingdom because while Saul was king, he was kind of like the CEO, and he had a chairman of the board who was over him, right? So he's in charge, he's the boss, he's the CEO, he's doing everything. But then he has a chairman who kind of stops in and advises him. And that chairman is the prophet of God. And in this case, it's Samuel. That's the way their government was set up, right? So Saul's the king. He's the boss. He's the CEO. And then he's got Samuel who's over him. And it says in chapter 15, verse 1, one day Samuel said to Saul, "It was the Lord who told me to anoint you as king of his people Israel." Now listen to this message from the Lord. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies has declared. Now, if you have somebody that you're an authority over and you have to continually remind them that you're an authority over them, like Samuel has to with Saul, things aren't going good. Something wrong with your leadership or maybe the way Saul is submitting. But this is an issue. Like right off the bat, we could tell like this ain't right? This is Saul must be a teenager here. I don't know what's going on. But in verse 3, he goes, "Now go and completely destroy the entire Amalekite nation. Cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and donkeys." Now, most of us here would gasp like, you want to conquer and subdue a nation? Like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with you? But any Old Testament reader at this point would gasp at the cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and donkeys part. Because what God is saying is, forget about the nation. You want me to light billions of dollars on fire, okay? That's what God is saying here. He's like, hey, Saul, I want you to just destroy an entire nation's gross domestic product. I want you to light it on fire. You have the opportunity to subsume and integrate that wealth into your kingdom and vastly enrich your people. But God says, I want you to destroy it. Everybody, oh my goodness, wow, that's a terrible waste of cattle, sheep, goats, and donkeys. Okay? And Saul, he's like, are you out of your mind, God? And in verse 9, it says, Saul and his men spared Agag's life, broke the rule. They kept the best of the sheep and the goats and the cattle and the calves and the lambs, everything, in fact, that appealed to them. If they wanted it, they kept it. They totally disregarded God's word and authority in their life. They destroyed only what was worthless or of poor quality. Now, I know that this is a little bit difficult to relate to, right? Because how many times has God told you, I want you to go conquer a nation? You know, that's not a part of my regular everyday experience. But this is where Saul is removing himself from the authority that God has placed over him. And I definitely have a lot of experience with removing myself from the authority that God has placed over me, let me tell you. One story stuck out as I was thinking about it. I was a camp counselor at my college, Wheaton College, greatest college on earth. You should send your kids there if you love them. Anyway, so I was working at the college's camp, and it's called Honey Rock Camp in northern Wisconsin. And I didn't go there for the kids. To me, it wasn't about camp counseling. It wasn't about earning college credit. It was all about 2 Ski Nautique 196 direct drive ski boats that they owned. And I was a water ski bum that summer, right? And every day we were hitting the buoys. It was awesome. And I remember the waterfront director. His name was Scott Epler. He came up to me and he goes, "Now, guys, there's only one rule, okay? The big rule is be polite to other boaters." Okay? You could do a lot of things wrong and it wouldn't be a big deal. But the one thing that you have got to do is you got to be polite to other boaters. And of course, at the time, I'm like, that's fine, I can do that. But now, Honey Rock Camp owned thousands of feet of lakefront on this lake. Okay? They owned the vast majority of lakeshore on this lake. And in front of some of our own beaches, we had a water ski course, right? One water ski course. And we would go out there and, we'd have a swerve session on the buoys. It was awesome. But then there was this one fisherman, who every day would troll up to the ski course, and sometimes, I swear to you, he'd drive his boat on a half plane, just making these big rollers over the middle of our ski course, going back and forth. He'd pull up to a buoy, and he would be casting into the ski course. And this guy, it's just mean. It's just mean, right? How are we supposed to? He's ruining my day, right? This is 1,000 tiny violins, not caring, right? I felt he's just out to get me, right? And I thought, surely Scott did not take into account this fisherman who's just being a jerk, because I need to ski, right? I have needs, okay, that are not being met right here. We are trying to ski, and every day this guy's out there. It doesn't matter what time of day. If he hears our boats, he comes out, and he's casting into this ski course. I just want to strangle him, right? And one day, I'm skiing. The guy comes out. He puts rollers across his course, ruins my run, right? And I tell Eric, the boat driver, to go back around again, and this guy is just parked by one of the buoys. He's casting into the course. Like, the line could wrap around my leg. Then I have a lure in my line, right? But I see him right around one of these buoys, and I make a beautiful cut on my power side right around the buoy, and I put the whole rooster tail right into his boat. Like, I totally drench him. I soak him. I'm like, yeah, that was awesome, right? And then I tell Eric to go around one more time, and I'm not proud of this part, okay? And there is a moral to this story. I'm sharing this for a reason. But I go back around one more time, and we go through the ski course, and I moon him, okay? And I'm not proud of it, guys. It's just what happened, okay? And I will bring it around. I'm not sharing this for no reason. But look. Obviously, I thought in that moment, my needs, my wants, my desires come ahead of the authority that God has placed over me. Okay? So I removed myself from God's authority because obviously, when this rule was made, it did not take into account my situation. I mean, this guy he's just mean. He needs this. He needs to be humbled, right? And how many times in our lives have we been there, right? Why would God wire me with these desires, putting this beautiful lady right in front of me who, I love and I'm probably going to get engaged to anyway? I mean, if he made me want to have sex, why would he tell me to wait? Like, this is ridiculous, right? Or why would God, create this situation where, I'm wired with these feelings and I need to express them in some situation? Why would he say that, this person just needs, I need to let him have it? Right? Why would God do this to me? And what we do is we say, I have needs, desires, and wants, and they supersede the command of God, the authority of God in my life. I'm just going to begin this simple little ride of pride in my life. I'm going to remove myself from the authority that God has placed over us. And that part doesn't seem that bad, right? That's what Saul does. He says, God's plan and purpose does not take into account my area of life. That's what we always do, right? This person, my wife, my parents, whoever, they don't understand what I'm going through. They don't know me. They don't know where I come from. So I need to remove myself from their authority because my plan, purpose, and desires supersede and are more important than what they want for me, right? Now, I want you to see what happens to Saul. In 1 Samuel 15:12, and this is the most destructive part of the whole thing. It says, early the next morning, when Samuel went to find Saul, someone told him, Saul went to the town of Carmel to set up a monument to himself. Okay? Then he went, that's funny to me. Then he went on to Gilgal. Anybody know that who builds monuments to themselves? Okay? I do. Verse 13, it says, when Samuel finally found him, Saul greeted him cheerfully. May the Lord bless you, he says. I've carried out the Lord's command. Have you ever done this? This is called a preemptive strike right here, okay? Sometimes Kristen, we have 3 kids, I wanted to, we have 3 kids, and she'll come and talk to me. I love all of our children mostly. And she'll come to me and she'll be like, hey, I'm going to go out for a little bit, and I want you to not let these kids die, and while I'm gone, can you please empty the dishwasher? Yeah, sure, no problem, right? She'll leave, and, it'll just be crazy. I'm just trying to keep everybody alive, while, I'm being on my phone. And I just won't find the time to empty the dishwasher. I'll get it like a quarter done. She'll come in the door, and I'll be like, shoot, And what I do, in my heart, I know that I failed Kristen, but what I do is I lie to myself, okay? I come up with a reason why I actually did what she wanted me to do, right? I'm like, well, I didn't get it, but I got it all done, And I manipulate the situation so that I actually believe, so that in my head I actually believe that I'm in the right. So Kristen comes in the door, and defensively I'm like, hey, good to see you. I did everything you ever wanted. I got it done. You're welcome, And that's what Saul's doing right here, and it's the worst because you can't argue with that. He actually believes that he's right. Saul actually believes that he's right. And I want you to see this right here. This is kind of funny, okay? Then Samuel's like, well, then what's all that bleating of sheep and goats and the lowing of cattle I hear? Saul demanded. He's kind of sarcastic, like, obviously, the dishes are in the dishwasher, John. Are you out of your mind? Verse 15, it's true that the army spared the best of the sheep and goats and cattle, Saul admitted. But they are going to sacrifice them to the Lord your God. We've destroyed everything else. And this is what I want you to see right here. Saul has become unteachable, okay? He has become unteachable, uncorrectable in this moment. And this is what the ride of pride does, okay? The ride of pride makes you uncorrectable, unteachable. In this moment, he can't admit that he's wrong. He's coming up with reasons why he's right. He actually believes that he's in the right. He believes that he had to do this. Well, I had to do this to honor God. I did it for you, right? And it's so manipulative because what he's doing here is he's taking his betrayal and rebellion and he's wrapping it up. He's wrapping it up in a gift for the other person. I actually had to do this for you. Back to my Honey Rock Camp story. We're pulling into the dock after, we took care of that guy. And I see Scott Epler, waterfront director, running down to the dock. And I'm like, I immediately knew we were busted. I knew that this guy somehow knew Scott, called the camp, and I'm busted, right? So we get back to the camp, and it's kind of hard being the only Asian guy in a boat full of white guys, right? Because we knew who it is, okay? Everybody knew. Well, it was, he probably described me. So I see Scott coming down to the dock, and I'm like, Scott! Hey! And I totally pull a Saul. You know what? I was wanting to talk to you. I know that you asked us to be polite to people, and I want you to know I've been working so hard just to do everything that you've asked. And what I've done, there was a fisherman who was just being really unsafe, and kind of encroaching on the camp's rights and property and stuff. He was like, I didn't want any campers to get hurt, but at the same time, I didn't want to get in a verbal altercation with this guy. So I found a really non-confrontational, peaceful way to resolve the situation without getting in a shouting match. Okay? And so I'm really just serving the camp's interest, and I'm taking care of you, right? Here's a gift for you, even though I've disobeyed you, and I was totally unteachable in that moment, right? I mean, just like Saul, this is what he's doing. And it's really interesting to me to see Samuel's response here. This is one of the more profound parts of the whole passage. In verse 17, it says, and Samuel told him, although you may think little of yourself, are you not the leader of the tribes of Israel? The Lord has anointed you king of Israel. Now, it's interesting to me because when I think of somebody who is prideful, when we think of somebody who's prideful, we think, somebody who's like arrogant, right? Somebody like political candidate, like fabulous. It's all fabulous. You guys, it's amazing, right? I mean, I think of somebody who's arrogant and confident and whatever, right? I mean, that's what I think of when I think of prideful. But Saul says, although you may think little of yourself. And he's talking about insecurity. And what I've realized is I think the ride of pride 95% of the time results in a lot of insecurity in people's lives. The most prideful people I know are most of the time also the most insecure people that I know. Because when we consider our own needs, our own wants, and our own value ahead of the needs of others, instead of people becoming potential that we can care for, they become competition to what we need, right? So now all of a sudden we're insecure. Are they a threat? Are they a threat? Are they a threat? Are they a threat? That's the way that we live, right? I want you to see Saul, the most powerful man. This is the most powerful, gifted, wealthy man in all of Israel. This is how he responds to a little boy named David, right? And David, by the way, throughout Saul's life is going to be an ally and friend. He will never lift a finger against Saul. Saul could have had a powerful ally and helper, but instead this is what he does with David. It says in verse 9 of chapter 18, a few chapters later, so from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David, right? So Saul is insecure and he's jealous. Verse 12, Saul was then afraid of David. Saul is insecure, jealous, and fear-filled. And then in verse 29, Saul became even more afraid of him, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Insecure, jealous, fearful, and lots of enemies in your life. That's the result of pride. And we know this. I've been there in my life. You've been there in your life. Everybody's a threat. You're afraid of everybody. You're jealous of everybody. You're competing with everybody because they're a threat to your own needs, wants, and desires, right? And you're constantly full of pride. You're on the ride of pride. You're unteachable. You're unapproachable. You're inaccessible. You're removed from the authority in your life, and you're miserable. And here's the truth. I've been there. I've been there in my life, miserable and alone, jealous and fearful. In verse 19, he says, why haven't you obeyed the Lord? Why did you rush for the plunder and do what was evil in the Lord's sight? He gains another opportunity to be taught here. Samuel's giving him a second chance. I just want to teach you. Why? Why did you do this? And check out Saul's response. It's whining. But I did obey the Lord, Saul insisted. I carried out the mission he gave me. I did. I'm just a victim. It's not my fault. It's everybody else's fault. I brought back King Agag, but I destroyed everyone else. And then my troops brought in the best of the sheep and goats and cattle and plunder to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. He's unteachable. He's unteachable. And it's unbelievable here, right? It's unbelievable. And I want you to understand that the most emotionally immature people that I know are the most prideful people that I've met. You see, when you get on the ride of pride, all emotional maturity stops. I have met 40-year-olds who act like 14-year-olds because they've been unteachable since they got on the ride of pride. Okay? And you just see them, and it's like, man, you should know better than this. And they're totally, it's just the wall of defensiveness. There's just the wall of, you can't touch me, you can't talk to me, I'm a victim. It's not my fault, it's your fault. I'm shifting the blame away. It's not my fault. You can't teach me, I can't admit that I'm wrong. And all emotional development stops. And the reason why I'm so intimately aware of this is I've been on the ride of pride for years in my life. Age 18 to 24, I was on the ride of pride for sure. Like this whole Honey Rock story, everything was everybody else's fault, and I was a victim Okay? I could never admit that I was wrong. It was always everybody else's fault. I shifted blame to everybody around me. I had to spray the fisherman. I had to do this. I had no choice. It's not my fault. It's your fault. And I was a victim, and I was miserable. And I would ask you, are you on that same ride? Have you been there? I would call the ride of pride the number one destroyer of marriages and relationships. As a pastor, 90% of marital issues, it might be adultery, it might be pornography, it might be something else that is the surface issue, but the root issue almost always is pride. Almost always. My needs, my wants, my desires, somebody who becomes unapproachable, somebody who is totally defensive all the time in life. And that's the root cause of so many relationship issues. It's a great way to lose friends and alienate yourself. I've watched it happen. And I have people sitting in my office who formerly loved each other, but they're both unteachable, immature, and unable to compromise. They focus on negative and see themselves as a victim. It's a terrible, terrible place to live. This is what the ride of pride ends up in our life. And it's so funny because you think that considering your own needs, wants, and desires would be fulfilling, but it's the most unfulfilling stance that we can live our life in. It is so, so bad. And I want you to know, if you think this is about the person sitting next to you, you're incorrect, okay? This is about us. This is about me. This is about ourselves today. Okay, and I want us to be introspective as we look at this, because this is the ride of pride, and God has so much more for us in this. I wrote down here, and this is probably where we're going to have some really profound stuff, so if you've zoned out, you want to get back in for this. But I wrote down, pride is the foundation of the fall, and it's the DNA of depravity. Okay, I believe that all human sinfulness began with pride, and I'll explain that in a minute. But first I want to ask you, what is the opposite of love? Okay, think in your mind, what is the opposite of love? When I think of the opposite of love, on its most surface level, I'm like, the opposite of love is hate. Obviously, John, why are you asking him this question? This is a silly question. But the reality is, let's think about the definition of love. Okay, if love is a decision that we choose to do, not a feeling, but a decision, in which we consider other people's needs, wants, and values ahead of the needs, wants, and values of our own, right? We treat other people better than ourselves. That's what love is, right? That's actually what love is. When we are loving to somebody, we're treating them better than we would treat ourselves. We're considering them before we have our own needs. Then the opposite of love is not hate, it is pride, right? Pride is the opposite of love. The most unloving thing that you can do to somebody else is you can consider your own needs, wants, and desires ahead of their own. That's the opposite of love, okay? Not hate, it's pride. Which is really, really interesting. And I would say that pride begins all other destruction. Lust, hatred, greed, abuse, gossip. It's all rooted in me considering my needs ahead of the needs of others. And if love is the mark of a Christian, the Bible says in John 13 that the mark of a Christian, you know Christians by their love for one another. If love is the mark of a Christian, then pride is truly the opposite of Christ-like behavior. What is the greatest destroyer of Christianity today and historically? I would say the greatest stopper of Christianity today and historically is pride. All church splits and church fights, right? Christian Reformed, United Reformed, Reformed, Presbyterian USA, Presbyterian Church America, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Oh, don't even get me started with Baptists, right? That's where I come from. All this is rooted in pride. Okay? All of these things are rooted in pride. I got to consider my needs. I need to get fed. I have my wants, my desires, my plans, my purposes, my traditions, my comfort zones ahead of the needs, wants, and desires of other people. Okay? If you are a non-Christian in the room today, I know what has ticked you off the most about Christians are Christians who act prideful. Okay? It's probably less about hypocrisy. It's just more about Christians who treat you like you're garbage, like they're more important than you, like they're better than you. Okay? Their needs, their desires, their wants, their righteousness, their goodness is more important than yours. That is the most offensive thing that Christians do in the world, right? And it's all rooted in pride. I want to share with you the end of my Honey Rock Camp story, right? So I tell Epler this, whole story, Scott Epler this story, and he's like shaking with rage, and he just tells me like very calmly, but I can tell like if I say anything, I'm going to get hit, okay? He tells me, you're off the waterfront for the summer. I'm going to come talk to you in a couple days when I'm calmed down. Okay, so that stunk because I wasn't there to hang out with kids. I was there to water ski, but now all I can do is hang out with kids. It was the worst. So he comes and talks to me a few days later. He goes, hey, look, John, the reason why I'm so upset, I know that fisherman was mean, but here's the truth. I've been trying to develop a relationship with him for 2 years because he was stung by the church as a little kid, and he has always thought that Christians are prideful and self-serving. And just this week, I made some great inroads with him, and he wanted to come to church with me for the very first time. And then you did your thing, and he said he's done, because that's what Christians do, is they're just prideful. They consider their own needs ahead of the needs of others. And it's just funny to me how my pride destroyed that situation. And to this day, I don't believe that that man has ever given Christ a chance because of my decisions. You know, and I just see this happening. Pride destroying the church. Pride destroying Christian witness in the world. I wrote down that the DNA of depravity is pride. Depravity is the sin that separates us from God, right? And depravity at its core, the sin that separates us from God, I believe, is pride, okay? Now, we believe in God, right? I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph. I believe in the God of the Bible, right? That's what I believe in. But if you believe in that God of the Bible, you also then must accept the existence of Satan, okay? The devil. And now God created Satan as the angel of light, Lucifer, and he was originally created as good. But what created all the evil in the world, what created all the sin in the world was Lucifer falling from heaven. Right? Because Lucifer embraced one specific kind of sin. Do you know what created all other sin in the world? Do you know what specific sin started all other sin in the world from the angel of light? It was pride. It was pride. That's what created the fall. That's what began sin in the world. It wasn't Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It was the serpent that began it all, and it started with Lucifer embracing pride. The DNA of depravity is pride. I want you to know that Satan, evil, at its very core, is pride. The tool that Satan is most familiar with, the tool that Satan uses the most to manipulate and disguise sin for humanity is pride. He's even taken the word that we have for it in English and given it multiple definitions so that we're not able to identify or even articulate what it is clearly. I have to spend 40 minutes describing it to people because we're so confused about it, right? Pride is what created Satan. And I want you to know that pride is the number one stopper of spiritual growth in individuals. You want to talk about a person who is stagnated in their relationship with Jesus? Always at the core is pride. Pride is the number one stopper of the physical growth and influence of a local church. You want to show me a church that is slowly declining or stagnating? It's a church that's forgot about the needs of others and become obsessed with the needs of the people who go there. You want to talk about the number one destroyer of the Christian witness in the world? It's pride. It's pride. People ask me all the time, hey, Pastor, what is the worst sin in the world? That's like a favorite question that people have. And I'm not going to say, like, this sin makes God more angry than others, but I will say that there is a most destructive sin in the world. And I would say that more than malice, more than adultery, more than lying, more than hatred, more than condemnation, more than any sin in the world, pride is the most destructive sin in the world. I want you to see how Samuel finally describes Saul's sin in this passage here. It wraps up. In verse 22, it says, but Samuel replied, rebellion, okay, removing yourself from God's authority, getting on the right of pride, that's the first step right there, is as sinful as witchcraft, okay? We don't have a lot of Satanists here. I know we've had some that we've gotten to bring here and have check out our church. He says, but it's not common in our lives. He says, rebellion, it's just the same thing. You might as well be worshiping, it's witchcraft, right? And stubbornness, right? So being unteachable starts off with rebellion, removing yourself from authority, and the second step ends up being unteachable or stubborn, is as bad as worshiping idols. You might as well just worship idols, light it up, worship other gods. So because you've rejected the command of the Lord, he's rejected you as king. Why did Saul fall? Why did Saul fail? It was because of pride in his life. He was tall, he was anointed, he was charismatic, he was proven. He'd been lifted up from the peasantry. He had every reason to feel blessed. He had every reason to feel God's hand on his life. He had every reason to be thankful, but he felt like a victim. He shifted blame around, and he considered his own needs, wants, and desires ahead of the needs, wants, and desires of the kingdom, the people, and the God around him. Ultimately, he removed himself from under God's authority, and you will see throughout his story, his number one flaw and defect is that he is utterly unteachable. He cannot admit that he is wrong, and he lost everything, even his life, because of pride. I want you to know that pride is taking a lot from you. Like, if you're living in the ride of pride, it's taking a lot from you. It's taking friends, family, relative, marriage. You're allowing pride to destroy those things. It hurts you. It stifles your growth as a person. God has so much for us, but when we live in the ride of pride, it stifles our growth. We cease to mature and grow as people. Like, that's what pride does. Pride ends friendships and relationships. It eliminates personal growth. I want you to hear this. It decreases your potential. The highest level that you can achieve as a person is decreased through pride, and it destroys your accomplishments. One of the men I admire most in my life, he has done so much. He has been a great father and husband, has allowed pride in the last year and a half to destroy everything that he accomplished. It's all washed away. It's washed away. It's gone. He had a great relationship with his daughters. Gone. Great relationship with his wife. Gone. All of that gone. Everybody respected him. Gone because of pride. Because he is on the right of pride, and he is unteachable. And here's what I want you to hear. Jesus changed everything when it comes to pride. Jesus set the world right again. And no other ideology does what Jesus does, okay? I want you to understand in Buddhism, it's a sevenfold path that we followed in Nirvana. It's about our benefit for our plan, our needs, wants, and desires before and above people around us. I want you to know that Islam, 5 pillars, ultimately rooted in our own achievement so that we can receive paradise for our own benefit. But Christianity uniquely was authored and perfected by somebody who died for the world around him, considering the needs, wants, and desires of other people ahead of his own needs. And it's not about our achievement, it's about his grace that he gives to us ahead of his own needs, wants, and desires, right? We become a Christian by asking Jesus to forgive our sins and lead our life. His good living is transferred over our bad living, right? And we then, in God's eyes, we look right. He looks at us, he says, man, you're my kids, I love you. Now, once we ask Jesus to forgive us, we begin to follow Christ. That's what Christian is. It means little Christian, little Christ, following Christ, right? That's what a disciple of Jesus is. And so, how do we follow Jesus? We follow his example of love, right? Jesus was the ultimate example of saying, I'm going to consider other people's needs, wants, and desires ahead of my needs, wants, and desires. I'm going to consider others more valuable than myself. I'm going to die for other people in my life. And as Christians, if we are Christians, if we call ourselves Christians, that means we embrace love, okay? We embrace love. We consider others better than ourselves. This is what Jesus did. Love is the opposite of pride. And I want you to hear this. This is my point. Love changes everything in the world. The world has been wired for pride. At the fall of man, that is what the world is. It's pride. I consider my needs, my wants. I'm a me monster. Me. I. It's all about me. You know, that's what it is, right? But pride changes everything. Love changes everything. Love changes everything. Love is the secret sauce that allowed Christianity to change the world. People look at Christianity all the time, historians, and they're like, there's no way that this could have started from 11 impoverished, uneducated teenagers from the backwater of Galilee with no connections. Right? There's never been a more unlikely place for the greatest movement the world has ever seen to begin. No other movement has begun from this level of unconnected poverty. And yet Christianity is by far the most transformative and successful teaching